Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am excited to bring you a guest from a completely different country. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Thank you so much, Gertrude. I really appreciate it. My name is Bjørn. I live a little bit outside of Copenhagen in Denmark, so I'm definitely at the other end of the world compared to Australia, but I've been there. It's a very, very nice place. I am a podcaster primarily, but have been working now for more than 3 years within the commercial side of podcasting. That means that I basically help brand connecting to building podcast strategies and using podcast as a medium where they can reach their target audience, basically. But my initial entry to the world of podcasting and the way that I fell in love with podcasting was being a podcaster myself. And I think my hero's journey probably started like most podcasters basically does, that I had something on my mind. I had something that was very, very important for me. And I had no idea about how to build a podcast, but it was so important for me that I found a way to do it. And with pure passion and with a pure grit, I managed to build a podcast that in Denmark at least is among the most listened business and entrepreneurship podcasts. The reason why I built it, if we can start there, was that I had back in 2013, I was told by the doctors that I should never expect to actually have my own children. That was a very personal struggle for me, where I really, really needed to rely on people who had, I would consider them role models. I had people helping me in that effort and having a lot of people who could inspire me, basically creating miracles, which it is when you are told that you are basically unable to have your own children. And luckily, there is a very, very good ending to the story, as I managed to get 2 children with my wife. So that is a very, very positive outcome that came from that struggle we had there. But for me, most importantly, when our son came back, he is now 7 years old. When he was born, I asked myself, what can I do in my life to try to give him the footsteps that he needs and the inspiration to go out and live a very good life and try to, how can he be successful on his own terms, basically. And that is where the podcasting medium came into sort of the attention, right? I realized that the best thing I could do, being me and not having a huge network or not knowing many people, I could definitely try to find the people that I find inspirational, try to ask them about what were their struggles, how did they succeed in life, and then from that I actually could I could hopefully make a library of people that my son could find inspiration in. And I have been on that journey now for 7 years. And that is also where I fell in love with podcasting, to be honest, and why I work with podcasting today. That is basically because uh, if I can tell a story about my actually very first interview, I started out, I had no preconditions for being a podcaster. So in that sense, I had never interviewed anyone before. I didn't have a network, and I have never published anything on sound. So I'm probably, the straight podcaster, basically, like most podcast stories, I guess, usually is. And but doing my first interview, I was actually biking to my friend's apartment. I was interviewing a good friend of mine, and I could just feel like on my bike that my heart started pounding very, very hard, and I was getting more and more nervous. And that was a really interesting dynamic because he was a really good friend. We had known each other for many years. I really respected him, but I just felt like there was something unique and extraordinary about that specific situation that I was being put into. I had the purpose of doing this for my son, so in that sense, I knew I had the passion and I had the purpose behind doing it, but still I was very, very nervous. And I think what I took from that, to be honest, for my, there are a few things I think is worth discussing, and I think is worth noting, at least takeaways I have from that story. For me, the podcast, building a podcast is, it is your place where you can actually have very meaningful relations and conversations with people. And that is, I knew that in that context, I could ask him questions that I had never dared to ask him before, and in that sense, one of the reasons why I to this day still enjoy podcasting as much as I do is that if you look at podcasting, it just gives voice, and it just gives the freedom to express opinions. It just gives a foundation and a room for having very, very, very good conversations, basically. So I think that is one important takeaway I took, because at that very unforgettable talk I had with my friend there, who ended up being the first podcast interview I ever did, I also learned a lot about him that I had not known before, about his background, about his struggles. So in that sense, the whole, at that moment, boom, I just knew that I totally loved being, putting these insights out to the world. And that is one of the main reasons why I think podcasting is so interesting today, and why I think I wanted to be a part of this podcast that we're doing now, is basically also to help promote what a podcast can do. So in that sense, one of the main takeaways I took from the experience of building this podcast, and now a lot of people have listened to my podcast, but I'm still very humbled by the people who have shared their time in the podcast with me. But also, I learned that because there are no gatekeepers in podcasting in that sense, I mean, you can build your own podcast around what makes sense for you, and I think that is probably going to be the second very big takeaway I have taken from my journey with my own podcast, which is called Role Models, by the way. It is also that you attract like-minded people, and I think that having an open and honest dialogue about the things that are important to you, and having something at stake when you're actually recording something, sending out to the world for them to listen to for very, very long time, then my perspective is that this content should be living forever. I don't know if that's realistic or not, but I definitely know that all of the content I have put out over the last 7 years in this podcast is still being used today, even the old ones, and the first ones I did, which also means there is an evergreen sort of ring to it. And that's just necessarily to know that I think it just gives a very interesting dynamic to see that you can put out stuff that people can benefit from, and that can actually engage people in many, many years to come. So that was a bit more about podcasting, but I think it was a necessary step to explain why we are having this discussion about podcasting today, because I think it's such a valuable tool and such a valuable medium for the discussion about diversity. So I don't know, Gertrude, I hope that answered at least the
Wow. Yeah, you've answered so many questions, and now my mind is exploding with more. So, what do you think podcasts can effectively be used, or how can they be used as a platform to amplify diverse voices and perspectives?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and I do believe that actually, if I can be honest, I think podcasting is one of the biggest opportunities for actually amplifying this diversity topic. And let me give you some background to the podcast market, also just a little bit to understand why this is the case. Because, as I said before, there are a few things to it. The first is that you can have unedited dialogue, around the topics that you find most important. So that also
Yeah.
means that, essentially podcasting is giving a voice to people who usually or who previously did not have one, right?
Yes.
You would have to, before, to have past gatekeepers in order to actually get your voice heard.
Mhm.
Podcasting is not such a medium. Podcasting is a medium if you have something on your mind, if you are authentically interesting in interested in sharing your feelings and sharing your experience around certain topics. You can do that freely, right? And that is very important because, we are living in a more and more interconnected world in many cases. So I mean, just from the fact that you and I are sitting having this discussion here, you are sitting in Australia, I'm sitting in Scandinavia, we would probably not have had this discussion had it not been for podcasting, right? And that thing that podcasting creates a space where you can explore different perspectives. You can engage with different people regardless of who they are and where they are in the world. If you think it's meaningful, if you think it's a meaningful conversation to have, you can have it. And the reason why, I mean, one of the most important things about podcasting to realize is that what most people fail to realize at this point is that now podcasting is a mass medium. It was born as being a very niche sort of thing back in the days. There was, I think, the joke in the podcasting world was that podcasters were like saying, basically, it was a small niche of white people, engaged in something, right? That was basically the birth of podcasting. At least that's the joke, right? But now it's a mass medium, and in US alone, actually on a weekly basis, you reach more people through podcasts than Netflix, right?
Yes.
That just
Yeah.
that just goes to say how many people are actually consuming podcasts now, and that is a huge opportunity because when you look at podcasting, uh, it's you don't have the same sort of as said boundaries around the podcasting,
Yeah.
whereas if you are going to present your argument towards a big audience of people on Netflix, you would have Netflix to approve that. They had to pay you for the rights and everything like that. But honestly, if you have a strong enough message, and if you have a strong enough thing you want to share through podcasts, you can reach everybody, basically, right? Everybody can go into a free app and listen to the podcast. So in my experience, that is one of the main reasons why podcasting is the medium to be
Yeah.
looking at or listening to when we are discussing having these diversity conversations, right? If that makes sense.
It does make sense. And it's an absolute huge opportunity for any content creators right now. So, in your experience with podcast marketing, what are some of the challenges in ensuring that diversity in podcast content, and how can these be overcome?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we can discuss, I mean, one thing to realize, if I just am being a little bit boring here, to probably start off the question. One thing to realize is, and this is a very important data point to understand as well. I just double checked before we were on this interview, and Gertrude, what is really, really important to understand is that if you look at the growth of podcasting,
Mhm.
actually the significant part of the growth happening right now is actually in more ethnic sort of populations, right? So they're
Yeah.
actually growth in double digits. So that also means, basically, if you look at the US podcast market now, it's more or less equivalent of how the distribution is, in terms of listener, and how the distribution is in the US population, right? So I
Yes.
mean, that's a huge opportunity, both in terms of reaching the right audience, but
Mhm.
also from a commercial perspective, obviously, it also actually means now that we are on this journey where you are able to reach more of a diverse audience with your marketing, right?
Yes.
So that being said, if we can discuss the challenges about it, because we are still in a phase, and please remember that I'm sitting in Europe, and Europe is behind US in terms of the development on this, to be honest. That is we are not there yet, but definitely what is a challenge I see two major challenges when it comes to diversity within marketing within podcasts, right? So there what is one. The one is that still advertisers are very much looking at audience size,
Yes.
and that for me is a challenge in two ways, because one, the audiences, the diverse audience in some cases are not as big yet that they can actually, that when they're looking at their numbers are saying we don't reach enough people, basically. So they're looking more of numbers rather than the quality. I don't personally like that approach, because if we're looking at that, then also I would much rather be in a conversation with a small group and very dedicated audience of people, rather than having a not very relevant conversation with a lot of people. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of brands are doing in their marketing. And this is not necessarily related only to podcast advertising, but also in terms of other advertising channels as well, right? So that is one challenge I see. The second challenge I see is that if you are to do very good, advertising, and something that actually, for me, this is the way I work with podcast advertising, is also to be very mindful that there should be a correlation between the brand and the audience interest of the content, right? And that actually requires a significant understanding of the audience in the specific podcast that you are listening to, right? And that is oftentimes, I have what I would call a very bad example of this happening in Scandinavia, at least, where they are buying, basically, where there was a large company that wanted to buy. They had some bad press about actually diversity, and about how the lack of female in their C-level, basically, right? So what they tried to do was actually just to find some podcasts that had a strong female audience, and then sort of, buy their way into actually that, and that really backfired. That actually put them in a very big shitstorm. And I think it's totally that's totally fair, because for me, if I can, this is my own personal perspective. When we are discussing diversity, it can never just be a marketing trick, basically. Diversity is not something that you just put in a campaign and then you have it, right? It is something that is built within the DNA of the company. So you can buy as many influencers and podcast advertisements as you want, but in the end of the day, if what people are not experiencing in your company and the culture that your company are having, then it's only like a gimmick, right? And that's actually the what happened to this company that I'm discussing here, because then a lot of the female employees came out and say, hey, we know that you are trying to promote that we are an inclusive company, but that is not what we are experiencing in our day-to-day life. Actually, it's the opposite. We are being not included. Actually, we are being decluded, as I call that. Exactly.
So, something. How do you overcome this?
That is the question, right? That is the question to be answering. And I would say, if I had the silver bullets to fix this, I mean, then I would probably be sitting in another chair, right? So to be honest, Gertrude, I think what companies need to be aware of, I think having the awareness is step one. Obviously, having the awareness that you are on a journey to this. I think having a focused effort on this internally in larger organizations is a prerequisite for actually succeeding with this. And I think, I have, this is one is that is very personal to me. One of my best friends is homosexual, and when I see this, when I see a lot of companies, or when it's Pride, when there's Pride celebration, a lot of them are showing the sort of the rainbow flag to sort of
Yes.
show their inclusiveness. But what really ticks me off is that a lot of these, on a day-to-day basis, they are not living this. I know that there are companies that actually have communities around being a homosexual, and around the challenges they are facing in the workplace. And I think that's that's the starting point, actually. Also, that people who are not a minority, not a part of the large group of people in that sense, can feel secure in their work environment. And that is where it started. And it is not just about putting up a flag a week, a year, and then you are inclusive, right? So I don't know if there are some answers to the question that you're posing there. It's a very interesting question, and it's something that luckily the good people like you are also raising, the awareness of, that this is something that we need to be working proactively to mitigate and to solve. But in my experience, at least, I think I'm usually sitting with a marketing perspective, and what I can only observe looking at the market and what brands are doing in general is that oftentimes marketing cannot play, you cannot just ask marketing to solve something that is a company problem rather than a image problem, right? Marketing can do so much, but if you are not, if you're not, if that's not how you are running your company, it's just gonna be inauthentic. And
It's
that
just
is,
putting a band-aid over a septic sore. You have to address the root issues first.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So what strategies would you recommend to podcast creators who want to incorporate more diverse and inclusive content?
I think it's and the reason why I'm a little bit hesitant to give an answer is because I'm not really a big fan of podcast creators are so diverse, right? What I could give strategies that may or may not work for one specific audience, but of creators, and it would not work for others. So I think I would actually like to highlight an example here, because I think I had a very, very insightful conversation with a podcast creator in Denmark, and I would like to actually highlight them because I think they have really shown the way. At least they have inspired me greatly. So basically, the podcast is called A Seat at the Table, and what it is built, it is created by two colored female, Naima and Yasmin, and basically, they lacked a place where they could have a conversation about challenges they were facing, like in a Scandinavian country. And they have built a Seat at the Table podcast. They have won awards with it. They have been luckily getting a lot of good attention for the work that they do. And I think it's very, very important what they are doing, because, they have built a community around that, but also they have basically just given people a place where they can meet around, the challenges they are facing, right? And I just think, yeah, exactly, and I think it's very, very valuable to use podcasting like that, But I actually, I remember one of the most important points they were having, and I thought that was very, very inspirational. And I think that's probably one of the strategies that I can pass on to the audience today, is that at one time they had a guest on that was, and sorry if I cannot remember exactly how they identified themselves, but the point was that they identified themselves in a way, that the two hosts of the podcast, they had, they had not experienced that. So rather than they are trying to interview her, they actually just passed on the mic and said, we cannot build content around that because we have not experienced what you have. So here is our audience, here's our microphone. Please go and let's dive into this challenge, and dive into this, dive into what you are struggling with, and you can hold the mic because you know how it is. We don't know how it is.
That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I mean,
Listen.
so I mean, I have a podcast where I interview people I adore. Sometimes they are diverse, sometimes they are not. But the point it being that when I'm interviewing, like we are doing now, it comes from our own experience, and I think what can be the most what in my experience is the most valuable strategy in terms of getting awareness and having these voices heard and building diversity is actually rather to be curious and to dare to shut your mouth and open your ears and your heart rather than just coming from your own perspective. So being able to actually listen well is something that I would encourage to everybody that are really serious about this, is being able to turn off their internal sort of dialogue and just
Yeah,
without any without any prejudice or anything else, listen to what people have to say, because people
I
have
love
other
that.
experiences, right, than
Yeah.
than that you might have. And that is actually, if I can put it on a little high note, that is one of the most important things I have learned from this 7-year podcasting journey, is actually that I have taught myself to listen very well. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of people could really benefit from this these days, rather than just talking to, listening to what they are saying themselves. Be
Mm.
curious and be open to other perspectives. So basically, if I can put it up on a little more high tangent, I would say that what have been the most valuable learning experience for me, having being a podcast host, is the ability to be able to listen with curiosity without any prejudice and just actually trying to understand people's perspective. And in my experience, Gertrude, I think that is one of the most important things we need to be doing these years, is actually listening more, being more curious about other perspective rather than having to you know uh, speaking to just to listen to ourselves, basically, right? If that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So my next question for you is all around marketing. How can marketing and advertising strategies be tailored to promote podcasts that focus on diversity and inclusion?
That is once again, I don't want to sound like giving a non-answer, but I think it's a very good question, and I think it is a question we should be thinking about being in advertising these days. How can we make sure that we are actually catering to a audience, and how are we having diversity built within what we are, within our marketing campaigns and marketing in general. So I think I think there's a few answers that I need to give about that. I think I touched upon it a little bit earlier on. One of the main thing is that we need also to, from a brand perspective, be more curious in that sense, that we are also looking more towards, like, we are burning the sort of the way we are used to do stuff. So we are
Yes.
also actually trying to innovate in that sense, that we are doing stuff that we have not done before. That is the journey I'm on with podcast advertising these days. Is that
Okay.
it's a new medium for many advertisers. So
Yes.
we need to start building the understanding that podcasting is a very interesting place to be, both for listeners, but also to hit listeners, to reach a target audience of listeners. I think there's a very big opportunity for advertisers in that, but we are still early on that journey. So we are
Okay.
talking specifically about how can we tailor our marketing strategies to be more inclusive. It also starts out by understanding that numbers are not everything. It's not
Yeah.
about reaching a wide range of audience necessarily. It's also about reaching the people who are sharing the right values, and that you are
Mm-hmm.
reaching the people who have a target audience that you maybe or maybe not would be able to reach in other channels besides podcasting. And
Okay.
what the prerequisite for that is that you actually is that you are starting out by being more explorative in, both in terms of how you're cooperating with podcasters, but also just searching wider, right? So you're
Yeah.
not just looking at like the 5-10 most listened podcast in your specific category,
Range.
but looking more towards a broader, and then also accepting that they may not have as big audience as you could wish, but they have an audience that you really want to engage with, and that they have the values that also harmonizes basically with your brand, right? I hope that sort of answers a little bit of the question.
It certainly does. Now, listen, this podcast was supposed to be 30 minutes long, but I'm going to extend it by another 30 minutes because I have an idea that I will share with you once we finish recording. I've got about 5 more questions to ask, and then I just want to pick your brain and see how we can work together. So I'll extend it to 30 minutes. I have something on straight after. If we run out of time, we can then connect maybe in 2 hours' time when I finish with what I'm doing. But podcasting, given your experience in different industries like travel, books, e-gaming, how can podcasts in these areas contribute to a more diverse and inclusive discourse?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually I answered that question quite a bit if I maybe be frank, because the way, I mean, it's a good question, but I mean, what's really what makes podcasting so interesting and valuable in terms of promoting a wider audience and diversity is also that is a total blank canvas that you're painting on, right? There's nobody telling you basically what a podcast should and shouldn't do. If you want to do 3-hour talks, you can do that. If you want to do 5-minute small, segments like this, then you can also do that, right? And in that sense, I think it's about realizing that there are no boundaries to this format. If you're looking at how you were building a radio program back in the days, you would have a very strict format simply because you needed to fit the sort of medium, right? But there are no limits to what you can be doing with that. And also what I think is a very, very valid insight to share on podcasting is that, think about it like, one, I've been covering this topic a little bit, but it's something that can create value for many, many years. If you are, it is evergreen. So in that sense, it's not like if you're publishing a newspaper, nobody would read the newspaper next day, right? But you can build a podcast now that people would have value for in 10 years, right? Basically. I mean, I know that from experience. So in that sense, also know that you are actually catering to a larger audience, than just who are listening to it right now. That is one thing. And I mean, the second thing is also to realize that I mean, you can build good podcasts for smaller groups, So in that sense, I mean, you are not, when you're looking at creating a podcast, for example, if you're a travel agency, if you want to have a more diverse podcast channel, you may not be able to hit as many people as if you're trying to build a blockbuster podcast where you have some of the most famous, TV presenters or whatnot. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't be doing, basically other as well, because you are also able to build something that is very valuable for a group of people. And if it's only listened by them, then it's also fine, right? You don't have to build, it's not like you have to pass the gatekeeper test. If a TV station, they have to look at every investment they do in the content they make and see, okay, can we hit enough people? Can we get a big enough audience that they actually want to listen to this or see this, right? You don't really necessarily have to do the exact same business case when you are a brand doing podcast advertising or doing your own podcast, because essentially your production costs are lower, which also basically means that you are able to build something for a audience that is much smaller, right? And not having to worry too much about the production cost running wild. So that is how I see podcasting can really, it's a few heuristics that I think in terms of podcasting, at least, you would need to think about when you are a brand, and if you want to promote diversity more, that you don't have to build blockbuster channels necessarily. You can build podcasts geared aimed toward specific audiences and create a lot of value for them. And I think that's the right way to think about it, to be honest.
So, how do you believe podcasts focusing on diversity contribute to personal development and understanding of different cultures and experiences?
Oh, Gertrude, how long do we got?
Good
you
one,
know,
right?
I love this question, but it's also something that's very close to my heart personally. So this is something I can talk very, very lengthy about. I think when I started out the whole conversation we had here on the podcast, I talked a little bit about my own journey, being a podcaster, engaging with people, both people I admire and people that I know that have a valuable insights to share. For me, the podcast medium is by far one of the most interesting, both in terms of that we had discussed, you can build an audience and a community around what you are doing, about your beliefs, about your values. You can do that, which is great. But as importantly, you can also, being a podcast creator, you can also put yourself on an accelerated learning journey, right? You can find mentors that are actually helping you, in that sense. And I think that's the untold story about podcast, is that a lot of people actually, you can listen to the biggest American podcast as well. A lot of those hosts, they are almost getting personal coaching, by having the right people in their podcast. So I think, being able to have honest and open conversation and authentic conversations is what podcasting can do. And what I think in terms of personal development, what people should be doing more of is having these conversations with a diverse range of people, because I think personal growth, I think perspective, I think life knowledge come from opening your ears and your heart to other people's stories, their
So,
struggles,
yeah.
being open-minded. So if I can give a hard sell on podcasting, if I had not done so already, it would definitely be that if you are building your own podcast, if you are being a podcast creator, you have the ability and you have the opportunity to actually learn a lot, and you have an opportunity to actually do something that makes a significant value for other people. But you can definitely also very much improve your own personal growth journey by
Yeah,
having these important conversations as we are doing today on important topics.
I love it. Now, let's talk a little bit about the matrix of success for diverse podcasts. In terms of marketing and growth, how do you measure the success of a podcast specifically aimed at promoting diversity?
Hmm. I think it's a hard question to answer, to be honest, but also because, and it's not like I'm disclaiming everything I'm saying. It's just to say that you podcast is so diverse, right? As I
Yeah,
said before, so I think I know one of the people that I really admire is Hetal Patel, sorry, from iHeartMedia, and I heard that she referred to podcasting as the medium of influence, basically. And I think, if I may be frank, that the only real measure of success, we can talk about numbers, we can talk about KPIs like we do almost always in marketing.
yeah,
How many people have listened, how long have they listened, stuff like that. But to be honest, if I may be a little bit frank, then I would say that the only real measurement of success from a podcast perspective is how many people you have been able to influence with the work that you are doing. I think that's the only real good answer I can give,
yeah,
because at the end of the day, I have had feedback from my own podcast where it had literally changed people's lives, and
yes,
having that sort of impact on just one person is just a huge value for me. At least it means a whole lot more than having hit a milestone number of listeners. Doesn't matter. It matters that the people that you are actually engaging with get value, real value, and are being
sharing.
impacted, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, two more questions.
Yeah.
What trends or future developments do you foresee in podcasting that could further enhance the representation and discussion of diverse groups and issues?
Yeah, so I think I touched a little bit about on one of the things. So the one thing is that as we see, there is more and more, people are listening to podcasts. So podcast listening is growing, which also means that more and more people are actually getting into the medium, which also means that you are able to both have these conversations with a more diverse audience.
Yes.
But also that you are actually seeing more creators from different walks of life and basically different places of the world, right? I'm really much looking forward to when we are seeing that more on a global level, we are actually starting to have more creators sharing their perspective on podcasts. I definitely feel like that's one thing. I also think that the second thing I would like to highlight during our conversation here is that that seeing more, and I'm a very big believer, as you probably can hear, in role models and having people that are inspiring you. I even called my own podcast role models, right? So I mean, that is I'm living proof that is actually something. And I think if there's something that really valuable is also that you can see how other people are doing and that you can take inspiration from that. So we are actually seeing more and more creators of different walks of life, of different diverse backgrounds, are coming into podcasting, and they are coming into creating this content. And the more people who are doing that, the more people will be inspired to share their own message, share their own voice. So I see that these two trends as being pivotal in order to actually increase diversity within this realm.
I love that. Now, the one thing that I should have asked you right up front in the beginning was, first of all, congratulations on your little baby boy. Thank you for sharing that personal story. It really paints a different picture to the people that I'm interviewing, that we're all human, we all have human challenges. And for your vulnerability to share that story with us was absolutely amazing. So thank you for that. And congratulations on having your little boy.
Thanks.
Very, very exciting. So thank you for this interview. I want to thank everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is bringing you a diverse range of talent, diverse range of content from people from all over the world. Come back again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again for the interview.
Thanks, Gertrude.
And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open, and definitely